Okay, here's an introduction to SAS. What we'll do in this tutorial is we'll basically go through reading in different types of data files into SAS. So say you have data in a CSV file or in an Excel file, I'll show you how to import that into SAS. There's a couple of ways you can do that. I'll also show you how to use SAS files and libraries in SAS, which is a quicker way to access some of this data. Okay, so that's what we'll be doing in this tutorial. Before we do anything, this is SAS. So this is this editor window is your actual program. This is where you'll be programming. And then this here is called the SAS log, which basically shows what's happening. You can see it tells me what version of SAS I'm running here. Of course, it's licensed through the university I'm at. And then you can see down here, it reminded me that my SAS is about to expire at the end of this month, so I've got to get this, I've got to renew my license, which I won't show you a tutorial for, but it's sometimes a pain. So anyway, I'll take care of that in a second. Before we do, let me just show you how you would program in SAS. The first line of code that you have to do is you have to set up your results viewer space. Does that make sense? So what I'm going to do, the first line of code, and this happens with any code that I write, I use this options function, and as I type options, you can see that it's blue. The maximum number of line spaces that I can have is 256. I just know this because I've been doing this a while. And the maximum number of page spaces is 30,000. And I don't want to center my results. I want it to all be left justified. So when I type in no center, any analysis that I do is going to be left justified in my results. I'll show you what this means, but it's just way easier for me to see. At every line of code, I have to hit that semicolon, which basically tells SAS that I'm done with that particular line of code. And anytime I want to run a line of code, after I've finished the line of code with a semicolon, I have to type run with another semicolon. So what, and then I'm going to, of course, highlight this line of code, and to run it, this is kind of a cute little thing. They got a guy that's running here. So anyway, computer scientists are so creative. I'm going to click that thing, and it ran that line of code. It just said there, I ran the line of code. I specified the line spaces, the page spaces, and I've left justified my output that's going to happen. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to import some data. Let me first show you where that data is, and then I'll talk about some common mistakes when we're trying to import data. So here's some data that I've pulled. Here's the directory for which it's pulled. Here you can see that I have something called Final Accounting Statements 2019. Let's open that up. It's a CSV file. It will open up in Excel. It's not a very big file. It consists of maybe 500 firms, and it gives their financial statements for 500 firms through the year 2019. So here's what the data looks like. Of course, the data that you're working with may look something like this, or may look like something other than this, but you can see this is just a GV key. It's an identifier. This is the date for which the data is used. Companies will file their financial statements at different times, at different quarters, and so this data date is actually the date that's used. It shows you the fiscal year is either 2018 or 2019. Some of these are just talking about the data format of the CompuStat data. This is the ticker symbol. Okay, so this is the ticker symbol of the, let's actually see how many companies I have here. About 450 companies. So this is the ticker symbol. This is the company's name. So if I widen that, you can see the companies that I'm looking at here. They're in US dollars. And then here are a whole bunch of variables, and this, of course, this is not an accounting tutorial, so I won't spend too much time discussing these variables. But what I've done is I've pulled in CompuStat data, and I've basically put in all of the balance sheet and income statement data in columns here. So ACT is the current total assets, current total assets. This is total assets. So the difference between total assets and current assets is going to be your fixed assets. This is cash holdings. So this is cash in the current assets account. of the balance sheet, and then I've got a whole bunch of other variables here. This is cost of goods sold from the income statement, depreciation from the income statement, the amount of total dividends paid out by the firm, EBIT, earnings before interest and taxes, inventory, another current accounts, in the current accounts, current asset accounts. Here's my current total liabilities. So these are total liabilities. Here's my total liabilities. So the difference between column T and column S is going to be my long-term liabilities, long-term debt. Here's net income, sales, taxes that I pay, interest expense. These are, of course, all from the income statement. And then you can see a couple of other variables that are here. This is the SIC code. This tells me what industry the company's in. And then I've calculated a few variables here. So ROE is the return on equity. I'll show you in a later tutorial how to go about doing this. ROA is return on assets. I'll talk about that as well. Current ratio, cash ratio, quick ratio, debt to equity ratio. Some other variables. Basically what I'm doing here is I'm going to try to analyze these financial statements of these 450 firms in a later tutorial. But what I really want to do here is I want to show you how to import this data from Excel into SAS so that you can begin working with it. So I'm going to go here, and I've intentionally made a mistake before I begin to import this data. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to use the import wizard. So I'm going to say under File, there's this import data link here, and it tells me what type of data do I want to import. I'm going to import a CSV file. I mentioned that earlier, that this CompuStat data is a CSV file. So I'm going to import a CSV file just from the drop-down menu. Hit Next, and it says where is the file located. So I'm going to go find that file. And I know where this file is. Of course, when you have data on your computer, you'll know where your files are, hopefully. I say that facetiously because I've lost many files in my computer here. Hopefully I can remember where it is during this tutorial. And there's my data right there. You can see it's a Microsoft Excel CSV file. So I'm going to highlight that, and it pulls in the directory as well as the CSV file. There's Final Accounting Statements 2019.csv. I'm going to hit Next, and it's going to tell me that it's going to be in a SAS library called Work, and then the member data name, the SAS data name, I can give it a name. I can give it, what I usually do is I just call this Data 1. So under the Work library, Data 1, this is going to be this CompuStat data. I hit Next, and then all I have to do is click Finish, and it will basically run a procedure. So in SAS, you'll see the words PROC, that's proc. Those are procedures. It's going to import this data, the CSV file, into SAS. I click Finish, and something's going to happen here. It says the import is unsuccessful. The file is in use. Does that make sense? So what happened here is when I opened the file to show you what the file looked like, if the file is opened, SAS will not import it. So I'm going to have to close this. And then I'm going to go ahead and re-import this into SAS. So this is a good exercise because it repeats what I've done here, so you don't have to go back and rewatch the video. Under File, Import Data, CSV file. I'm going to find where that file is located again. Give me a second while I go to the directory where it's at. I'm going to highlight that. Again, the file is located in this directory. This is the file name, Final Accounting Statement 2019.csv. I click Next. It's going to put it in the SAS library called Work, and I specify the name. I could name this anything. I could name this my first name. I could name this CompuStat. I'm just going to name this Data 1 just to keep the SAS data sets that I create it'll make it a little bit easier. I'm going to click Finish here, and it imported. You can see that work.data1 data set was successfully created. The data set work.data1 has 450 observations and 35 variables. You already know what that looks like. I can click in here, go under Libraries, under Work, and there's a SAS data set called Data 1. I can open that up, and that data set should look familiar, right? We just recently have gone through that data set. There's current assets, total assets, cash, cost of goods sold, depreciation, and so on. And so SAS has now imported the data, and I can work with that data set. I'm going to close the table from the libraries here. Go back to Explorer. Now watch what I'm going to do here. I'm going to run a quick proc print, a procedure print. This is a second alternative way that you can view the data that you've just imported. So I'm going to say proc print. That's a SAS procedure. In any SAS procedure, when I say proc print, it recognizes it as a SAS procedure because it puts it in dark navy blue. I'm going to say data equals. So I want to print the data, work.data1. But I don't want to print all 450 observations. What I want to print is just the first 20 just to see if it read in correctly. Does that make sense? So I'm going to highlight this line of code that I've just written. Notice the procedure, the proc print is in dark blue. Data equals work, that's the SAS library, .data1. Data1 is the name of the SAS data set, the name that I gave the CompuStat data when I imported it. And in parentheses, I only want to look at the first 20 observations. I close that line of code with a semicolon. I say run and close my run statement with a semicolon. I highlight that line of code and click the run button. And so this is an alternative way. Notice that it's left justified. In my options line of code, if I had not put no center, it would have been center justified and I would have had to scroll over to look at it. So it's all left justified. This is nice. This looks just like the Excel spreadsheet that I showed you when I opened up this CSV file in Excel a little bit earlier. Okay. Notice, however, here that it only printed the first 20 observations. That doesn't mean there's only 20 observations in my data set. It means I just wanted to view those 20 observations. I do this frequently. I get made fun of by some colleagues because I print my data all the time just to see how it looks. I'm a little OCD about this. So I only print 20 observations. Otherwise, it's going to slow down my computer every time it has to open. Okay, so that's how I would pull in some data. Let me show you something else that we can work with. Notice here that under the work library, here's my data 1 SAS data set. That consists of the same data that you're viewing in the results viewer here. What I could do is I could actually save this data as a SAS data set on my computer. Okay. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you how to maybe import data from a CSV file using the import wizard that we just used for this CompuStat data, and then I'm going to export the data out as a SAS data set. The benefits of doing this is it's way quicker to call SAS data sets if you're working with these data sets. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new library. I'm going to say libname, so I'm going to create a new library name. I'm going to call this libname Ben, my first name, and I'm going to tell SAS where this library is located. I want this library to be located at this directory because this is the folder that I'm working with. So I'm going to copy this. So I just Control-C copied that library. And I put this in. I've got to add a slash there to tell SAS where the library is, and notice that it's in a little quotation mark there. Does that make sense? So I'm telling SAS there's a new library named Ben. This is the directory for that. Let me close that account. When I hit run, semicolon, and run this, let's go to the log here, and it says, look, this library reference Ben, the name of the library, was successfully assigned as follows, and it pointed SAS to the directory that I'm going to be working with. Now what I can do is this work.data1 file is a SAS data set. What I could do is I could export that data back out to that library, which is on my desktop or my laptop here under this directory. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say data2 set work.data1. Let me explain what I'm doing here. Sometimes I get ahead of myself. So I'm creating a new SAS data set called data2, and what that SAS data set called data2 is, it just sets the previous data set that I'm working with. So inside of this data step, these two lines of code, I could do a whole bunch of things. I could create a new variable called new variable, and it could be a row of ones. Okay, so watch. I'm gonna highlight these 4 lines of code. I'm gonna run, and notice at the very end of this data set is that new variable name 1. I'm going to take a more careful approach to do this in a future tutorial, but this data step shows you how to work with SAS data sets. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to say data ben dot final accounting statements 2019 set data to run. So what I've done here is I've told SAS to create a new SAS data set under the library Ben. The SAS data set is going to be called Final Accounting Statement 2019, just like the CSV file that we had earlier. And I'm going to set this data to SAS data set that I just created. Okay. So when I run this, I'm going to go view the SAS log, and it says there were 450 observations read from dataset work.data2, and the data set is now under ben.final accounting statement 2019. It has 450 observations, 336 variables. So it worked. Let's go here to my directory, and there you see there's the SAS data set. Okay. So the SAS data set, now I have a SAS data set that is the identical data set of this CSV file, and now I can call that SAS data set whenever I want to, right? So I could say, look, if I had multiple SAS data sets in a particular folder, so let's say I had a whole bunch of SAS data sets here in this folder, what I could do is I could specify a library name, and I could call those SAS data sets all the time. For instance, I could say data3 set ben dot final accounting statement 2019 proc print data3. Okay, hopefully this makes sense. Okay, I'm creating a new SAS dataset called data3, and that SAS dataset I'm pulling from the library Ben. And the SAS data set that I'm pulling in is called Final Accounting Statements 2019. When I run those few lines of code, there's my data set. It's called SAS dataset 2000 or SAS dataset data3, right? And it just pulled in from this directory. So hopefully you become familiar with importing, say, CSV files, using SAS data sets. You can see here that here's data 1, data 2, and data 3. All 3 of these data sets are very similar. This was the original CSV file. This was just the new file I showed you how to create in the data step. And this was the data 3 file that I re-imported as a SAS data file from my directory. And that's how you would read in some of this data.